Yeah, I like to start my presentation when I talk about Panama with this slide. This is the Bio Museum at the entrance of the Panama Canal in Panama. A few years ago, they enlarged the canal to allow passage of larger and larger ships. So they also built this Bio Museum, and the designer was Frank Gehry, this architect that uses the buildings to tell a story. For instance, on the left, I think that's in Prague, the dancing house is the building dancing. And in Panama, he designed this Bio Museum with this, you can see the roof, the green and the red roof. They are like kinked and deformed, and there's the impression of a collision. So that's the idea there is in most people's mind, that the collision took place in a sudden, violent manner, and as soon as the collision took place, the great American biotic interchange took place, during which the types of animals crossed. So coming north from North America into South America, there were horses, large cats, and some types of llamas, and going north from South America very slowly, some sloths, and then giant sloths, and then I think there's a possum somewhere there. Yeah, I think there's a possum. Anyway, so the idea that is in everyone's mind is that collision took place instantaneously and in a violent manner. So I'm going to talk about the geology of Panama, and then talk a little bit about some of the new developments, because we keep working on that. We started working with Sarah Moron. You all know them, about almost 10 years ago, probably a bit longer than that. So now I'm here in the Universidad del Norte, in Barranquilla, Colombia, right here. That's probably the only one, or one of the few, geology programs in all of the Caribbean. See, there's one in Jamaica, and but actually in the actual Caribbean, there's very few. So I'm going to talk about this part of the world, Northwestern South America, Southern Caribbean. And this is, in very general terms, a case of continental growth by successive arc continent collisions. And the further away you go from the craton here, the younger these collisions get. So here we have under some supraterranes, we have Paleozoic collisions. Then we have probably some cryptic Cretaceous collisions. And then as you get outboard, you get the latest one, which is the Panama arc collision. And that's the last one. And it has very significant impacts in both climate and biogeography. So much so that people regard this as the greatest example of biocarrions. It's been Novacarian event. It's better dated than the Isthmus of Panama, as the growth of the isthmus separated two oceans, Caribbean and Pacific Ocean to the south, and also joined two different populations, so much so that Darwin himself couldn't have designed a better experiment. So it's very important from the biogeographical point of view. So from the climatic point of view, Hogg in 2005 published a series of papers in which he described how the Isthmus of Panama had put ice in the Arctic. So the general idea is that the Gulf current gets initially enhanced by closure of the Isthmus of Panama. That brings more moisture to the northern hemisphere, which in turn brings more snow cover to Siberia, freshening the Arctic Ocean, which in turn brings more fresh water to the northern Atlantic, which then short circuits the Gulf current, and then glaciation starts. So that's the general idea by Hogg in 2005, that closure of the Isthmus of Panama put ice in the Arctic about 2.7 million years ago. So I'm going to talk about Panama, the geology of Panama. And the idea is that I'm going to first talk about provenance and analysis, provenance analysis and geology of the Caribbean plate. A little bit, some of the recent developments are here in the Caribbean plate, topography, and so. Then I'll describe some of the types of closure, and then some of the latest developments regarding paleobathymetry. So the geologic evidence that we brought into this discussion was that between Panama and northwestern South America, they are mutually exclusive geochronological domains, and we demonstrated this with the tidal circumgeochronology, both in modern science and Cenozoic units. So I'm going to show a little bit why is it that these are mutually exclusive geochronological domains. These are the tidal circles from the Magmatic Formation, which is a middle Miocene unit. So let's go to northwestern South America about 90 million years ago. We have the leading edge of the Caribbean plate. So this is a paleogeographic reconstruction. We did this with the help with Andres Rodriguez. You may know him. I think he's working in Melbourne right now. And then this is the Caribbean plate. We did this reconstruction using G plates. This is northwestern corner of South America. Right here, we reconstructed this as a passive margin, relocated all the Jurassic ravens and the passive margin of northwestern South America 90 million years ago. On the western side of this ocean, there is an island arc, intra-oceanic arc, fragments of which are today preserved in northern Andes, and here are the names. And then here is the leading edge of the Caribbean plate. So I think most people now agree that this plate swept the northwestern corner of South America from southwest to northeast, starting more or less 90 years ago. That when the collision started to take place, takes about 10-15 million years to be completed. By 65 million years ago, end of the Cretaceous, beginning of the Paleocene, we have a complete collision. The arc, the intra-oceanic arc, has been accreted and start cooling down. There is a subduct flip on this margin. What we call this marginal Caribbean plate or proto-Caribbean plate starts to subduct. There's subduction initiation. There's already an intra-oceanic Panama arc in the trailing edge of the Caribbean plate. So this is the moment of the collision. What do we have along the margin? In the margin, all along the margin, we have molasse deposits. We have these coarse grain conglomerates probably related to alluvial fans that were deposited on top of the previous marine sequence. The ages of these preserved in these molasse deposits are reflecting the ages of the intraoceanic arc that collided, which is about between 72 and 80 million years old. This is it. This is the geochronological composition of these molasse deposits that were accreted, that were deposited following first collision of this intraoceanic arc. Then we get to 15 million years ago. This is when things get interesting. We have the initiation of part of a post-collisional flare-up along this margin. So between about 60 million, and the youngest is probably 42. We have this continental arc developing on the margin, all along the margin. So we have all these plutonic bodies intruding and cross-cutting the collisional structures, while in the intraoceanic arc, the still intraoceanic arc of Panama, we have still an active subduction and an active magmatic arc. It's also interesting because this is where we had G plates. We put the reconstruction, and we allowed the Caribbean plate to be deformed whichever way it needed to be deformed. So we had these fragments of the Caribbean plate, and then we decided, okay, well, because it's the space to insert the Caribbean plates is so small between the Americas or between northwestern South America and the southernmost extension of North America would be these Maya blocks. We had to allow the Caribbean plate to be deformed. So we put this suggestion here that maybe there is some types of structure within the Caribbean plate. There is a limit to the thick plate, so that this area here should be subducted before 42 million years, but then at more or less 42, this arrives to the margin because it is thick. It should choke this subduction zone. It's a recent paper by Garcia Reyes and Diment. We're going to look closely, but they show in this area here of the Caribbean plate some marine magnetic anomalies that seem to suggest also deformation within the Caribbean plate realm. That's 50. So this is the type of data that Garcia Reyes and Diment are showing, and they are suggesting that there's internal deformation of the Caribbean plate. This was at the moment of formation, the Caribbean plate, according to their interpretation, formed not on top of a hotspot, but most likely on top of a mid-oceanic ridge in the Pacific Ocean. So there will be two ridges, one that's slightly older, one that's slightly younger, one slightly older, and then as the Caribbean plate gets inserted between the Americas, it undergoes deformation, fracturing, also internally deformed. So this is also suggesting that, which is in agreement with an old idea by Burke and others in Senghor and Shelal Senghor, and with among them in 1978, that the Caribbean plate, here, this is Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and this is northern South America. The Caribbean plate, it seems to resemble one of these Prant cells, which are the type of deformation that takes place as something gets forcibly extruded in one direction. So that those are the types of structures that you can see in the Caribbean plate that suggest deformation, internal deformation within the plate. So we cannot treat this plate as a rigid plate in our reconstructions. By 38 million years ago, we still have subduction of the Farallon plate, and this is a new reconstruction by Magir et al. from your group. And then in the next slide, I'll show how it impacts the development of the margin. So by 38 million years ago, we have subduction, flat subduction of this peripheral Caribbean plate under northwestern South America, and then a complete magmatic silence along the margin. What we record using all of the thermochronological tools is cooling, fast cooling or faster cooling than another times. Meanwhile, in the intraoceanic Panama arc, which is in the trailing edge of the Caribbean plate, there is still continued magmatism both on the west and the east parts, not so much in the center. In the center part of Panama, magmatism stops at about 38 million years ago. So this flat subduction episode can also be mapped, and this has been recently mapped by Kornweit and others this year. They have tomography, and these are the lines of mantle tomography. And this cross section here represents this one here, and they seem to imagine to show an image of a Caribbean plate subducting the way to passing the 660 limit. But it's not a simple slab. It's complex. It's broken up in two segments. One like on top here, which would be this one here, and then one below, which this one here, and there's another one here. So this is a complex geometry. I don't think we still understand very well how it relates to these types of uplifts all along the margin. Let's remember that this is the Santa Marta Massif, 6,000 meters elevation, right 20 kilometers from the coastline, and probably 50 from the trench. And then right next to this uplift, the Santa Marta Massif, there is the lower Magmatic, which is a very, very deep, triangularly shaped basin. It has about 6 kilometers of post-Eocene deposits. So this huge uplift right next to this enormous trough, all right on top of these complex geometries. And I'm hoping Andres Rodriguez can explain this someday. 21 million years ago, we have splitting of the Farallon plate, Cocos Nazca, and then that opens a slab window, slightly larger than other works had previous work had suggested. Again, work by Guerin et al. In 2020. And so we have here the fission, and then the restarting of magmatism as the Nazca plate is subducting. So this already collision, tectonic collision, and the Pan arc is already docking or docked to northwestern South America, and there is beginning of subduction of Nazca plate along this margin, reinitiation of magmatism here, and also in Panama. So magmatism restarts. So that's why we have, this is the reason why we have exclusive geochronological domains. There is a very complete magmatic silence in northwestern South America between about 42 million years ago and 21. So there is that gap, that magmatic gap in western South America, while in Panama, in the Isthmus of Panama, magmatism was going on strong. So what we did during our previous or original work in 2015 was to sample different basins in northwestern South America in the eastern side of the suture. This is the suture between the intraoceanic arc and northwestern South America. So we sampled industry boreholes, and we also sampled stratigraphic sections here near the suture that cover the Oligocene to the late Miocene. So we found these stratigraphic sections and boreholes. All of these are boreholes. We have foraminiferal control, palynological control, and of course, we also ran the tridal zircon geochronology. All the blue squares are there. And then in middle Miocene strata, we found a new signature that was not present in the previous time, Oligocene and early Miocene. So what we found is that for middle Miocene strata in these basins here is in northwestern South America, for middle Miocene strata, there is a new signature, which is these blue bars in this histogram. I put this in a logarithmic scale for easy reading, that it shows this new signature, which is about 30, 40, 50 million, which is very common in Panama, but a few million years before it was absent in northwestern South America. The conclusion that we reach is that that was the time of arrival of or docking of the intraoceanic Panama Arc to northwestern South America. We not only find that signature right here about 30, 40 million years ago, not only find it here in northwestern South America, these basins here, which will be the Amaga Formation. So we find it there. But when we look south along the Cauca Valley here, we also find it there in middle Miocene strata. And then we go down across the Central Cordillera, and we also find it here in this square, what we call the Tatacoa Desert. And if we go down all the way south, we also find it in the Solimões Formation in Brazil. So that docking of Panama in middle Miocene times shed a geochronological signature that got spread all over northwestern South America. And this also helped us put together this paleogeographic reconstruction for northwestern South America. This is, of course, the paleogeographic reconstruction from G plates, but we put on top significant relief in black, and then here in this pattern we have the Pebas Formation, this lake, this wetland that was present in Western Amazonia at this time, 13 million years ago. And then what we propose is that the drainages at this time were not only crossing the Eastern Cordillera here, but also the Central Cordillera and the Western Cordillera. So this represents a portal, an Andean portal, lowland Andean portal that, as you can see here, communicated the Amazon basin through the lowlands of the La Victoria Formation in the Tatacoa Desert, crossing what is today the Central Cordillera and probably even the Western Cordillera. This would be the source of that magmatic signature, Panamanian magmatic signature. And of course, that signature is abundant in Panama. This is a geologic map of Panama, showing that as I showed in the reconstruction, it was located in the trailing edge of the Caribbean plate. And from the time of the inception of the arc on top of the Caribbean plate, on the trailing edge, about 60, 70 million years ago, that is the most common, that magmatism hasn't stopped. And there is, of course, that signature that we see in northwestern South America, starting in middle Miocene times. But we can also look at Leon and others in 2018, and now Arisa, which is a paper in review, and I'm hoping it gets published early next year. They're showing that the Panamanian signature is present in northwestern South America, but similarly, later, the northwestern South American signature, which is Tectonic and older, is also present in Panama, what I call the Baudot region here and the Atrato region. So I'm going to show just that. This is the middle Miocene strata in the eastern part of the isthmus, easternmost part of the isthmus. And sure enough, these units or these formations, which are middle, late Miocene, contain a characteristic central Cordillera signature that is, of course, absent in Panama. So this couldn't have come from Panama. This had to be northwestern South America, and the Panamanian arc had to be together docked. When we look at Baudot, the Baudot region, and this is the work that I told you is coming up probably early next year, we see the same. The age of the strata here is less well constrained, but we see again old ages together with the Panamanian signature, and this seems to be indicating that that part of the Panama arc was already docked to northwestern South America by middle late Miocene times. So in summary, there's no magmatic zircon ages in between 45 and 25 million years in the northern Andes. And we saw why this magmatic gap related to probably collision and subduction of flat slab. Those ages appear only after 15 million years in the northern Andes and all the way to Amazonia. That signature is most likely originated in Panama, where it is abundant. The opposite case, the signature is absent in sequence of older than 15 million years in Panama, but appears after that. So we think that the tridal exchange took place after 15 million years. There's a microphone open somewhere. Okay. So now that we have established with some confidence that there was docking at about 15 million years ago, we can talk about closure. So docking doesn't necessarily mean closure. So we can think of three types of closure. One is tectonic, one is geographic, and one is ecological. Tectonic is once the ocean basin, deep 3 to 4 kilometers deep ocean basin disappears. There will be tectonic closure. Geographic, when there is continuous or nearly continuous land, and that nearly continuous mostly refers to the eustatic variations. And then finally, ecological, if it makes sense for organisms to cross over a land bridge. So the first example I can come up with is a near geographic closure. There is already tectonic closure. This is Taiwan. Of course, it's already the trench has lost its character. Now it's suture. Is putting the island of Taiwan is thrusting over the Chinese continental margin, which is a passive margin sequence. And this Chinese continental margin, or this Chinese sea, is very shallow, and that's why we could think that maybe with large eustatic variations, could have been a land bridge during the last glacial maximum. This would be one example of near geographic closure. Then another example would be Indonesia and Australia. I'm sure you know this better than I do. But this is a paper by Coates and Stollard, and they compared these to Panama, both in size and style, about 5 million years ago. And they contend that during the last glacial maximum, of course, the shallow parts of the oceans dried up. So all of this was land, all of the areas inside that line. There's only this little gap here with It's very narrow. I think it's 40 kilometers, and it's about 2,000 meters deep today. And today it allows about 2.6 sphere drops in circulation. And these are, of course, gaps are there are still trenches here, so these are much deeper. And then Coates and Staller go further, and they say these probably look like the Canal Basin in Panama about 5 million years ago, where there was the accumulation of the Chagres Formation, which they contend was about 500 meters deep. So that's the comparison they make, at least in size, showing Indonesia and the last glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, the small gap here, which they compare to the gap here in the Chagres Formation in Panama. So this is a paper that has just been accepted a week ago with Elena Stiles. She went to the Chagres Formation. This is a photograph of the Chagres Formation in Panama. These things that you see here are actually very large cross bedding in a coquina unit, which is the Chagres Formation. It has this, but it has a coquina. But the previous work, which was by Laurie Collins and others in 1996, they called it the smoking gun for the closure of the isthmus, and also they indicated, based on benthic foraminifera, that was the last deep water connection across the isthmus. So these are the different paleobathymetry estimates for the Chagres Formation, which include deep interpretations, which they say, okay, it probably looked like the Valley-Lombok Gap. However, using ignotaxa and sedimentological analysis, Elena proposes that indeed the maximum depths of accumulation for the Chagres Formation are less than 100 meters deep. And this is her work. She found all this, described all this ignotaxa and also sedimentological data, placing the Chagres Formation in a shallow marine setting, likely less than 100 meters. So it seems that that gap was only ephemeral. So the connections, if there was a eustatic sea level variation, it probably was enough to dry that seaway at times. Finally, so the last one type of closure I'm going to talk is ecological closure. So we know that the Isthmus of Panama was had docked in about 15 million years ago. By 5 million years ago, during the deposition of the Chagres Formation, the positional depths were shallow. So even static sea level variations would allow a land bridge to form. So that would be a geographic closure. But still, the Gavi, the Great American Biotic Interchange, only took place 2.7 million years ago. So that's where the habitat or ecological closure comes, which is the idea that during the glacial times, northern South America, in fact, most of South America, dries up and becomes a savanna. And there's a very interesting work by Piperno and Dolores Piperno and others in 2003 showing that in Panama, during the late Pliocene, the last glacial maximum, the Panamanian Bridge, which today is a jungle, was a dry open habitat. So the reasoning goes, if that was the case during the last glacial maximum at 2.7 million years ago, that's when the initiation of glaciation, that's probably what happened. And then the Gavi is the result of the first glaciation. So, which of course, as I said during the talk, it requires a previous tectonic closure at 15 million years ago and geographic closure about 5 million years ago. That's a paper I'm hoping that will come out next year and probably late part of the year. And this is Federico Moreno defending his thesis in the middle of the pandemic. He took samples from fossil samples, enamel fossil, from fossils all over northwestern South America and Panama, to try to determine their diet, to see if they were in a jungle environment or in a savanna-like environment. And sure enough, his results are showing that it was a C3, therefore savanna-like environment. As I said, I'm hoping this paper comes out soon, hopefully next year. So these are the conclusions. I think I already talked about it. Interesting that Caribbean plate is internally, more and more information is coming out. Even industry seismic data is showing the same. There's internal deformation. There's probably mid-ocean ridges in the middle of the Caribbean. We are also starting to in the subducted Caribbean slab under northwestern South America, and that's also interesting because if we allow the Caribbean plate to deform, what happens to that slab when it gets bent in the map view? We're also starting to better understand slab windows under isthmus, and then, as I said, we are dating more precisely the geographic the tectonic, the geographic, and the closures in the Isthmus of Panama. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for your attention.